It's been a great day here. Thank you to Ray, Michelle, everyone at NJBIA for putting this important conversation together. We're here today to talk about federal energy and environmental policies under Trump. Not sure what we're going to talk about, but we'll find a few things to discuss. I'm Grace Power, General Counsel and Executive Vice President for Government Affairs at Solar Landscape. We are the national leader in commercial rooftop solar. While we have covered many important issues today, I think we all know that some of the most consequential shifts in energy and environmental direction right now originate not in Trenton, but in Washington. And so as we're wrapping up the day, we are here to examine how the Trump administration's early actions, and there have been many, and anticipated next steps, to the extent that we can anticipate those, may reshape federal policy on climate, energy infrastructure, permitting, and environmental regulation. We will also talk about what those changes could mean for New Jersey's policy goals. I am joined today by two experts who have been closely tracking and shaping federal policy from different vantage points in DC. Timothy Fox is a managing director at ClearView Energy Partners, leading research firm that provides independent and forward-looking analysis of energy and environmental policy developments to investors and corporate strategists. Matt Leggett is a partner at K&L Gates, whose federal policy practice focuses on energy, natural resources, and environmental issues. He previously served as chief counsel for the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. We're going to start off on a high level. Timothy and Matt, we have seen a rapid shift in tone and direction, to say the least, from the new administration on federal energy and environmental policy. How would you each characterize the administration's overarching approach to energy and environmental regulation so far? Is this a full reversal of the Biden era, or is it something more targeted?
Can we turn? Oh, there we go. Hi. Before I begin, I just want to emphasize that as a research firm, we're agnostic, so we're not lobbyists or advocates of any kind. But we've been talking a lot, and industry should be prepared for, and people watch for that pendulum swing when there's a new president from a different party. But in recent years, we wonder: is it really a pendulum or is it a catapult? At this point, the transitions can be so aggressively sharp, and I'm sure everyone in this room is aware of some of the actions that have happened. So I'm going to skip that. But the one thing that I do really want to emphasize is that this administration has abandoned the all the above approach that Republicans used to support. He's adamantly supporting certain resources tend to be conventional, nuclear power, and is opposing and trying to constrain renewables. And there's 2 points I want to emphasize there. There's first the build-out implications. Now, we're only about 10 months into this administration, so it's not a lot of data points. But thus far, data from EIA, from the RTOs, from utilities suggest that the efforts to constrain onshore wind and solar have not had a big impact. Onshore wind, onshore solar, batteries, they still dominate the interconnection queues, and the cancellations of those projects have not gone up. In fact, actually, they've gone down, the cancellation of solar and wind projects during this term. So that's the first point. But the bigger point, the more important point, is the politicalization of power, right? That we used to talk about windy Republicans and gas-friendly Democrats. There's not many of them left, and Democrats are now really the champions of green energy, and Republicans are the guardians of fossil fuels. And so we don't, that politicalization increases risk. It increases uncertainty for a lot of our clients who, as she mentioned, are institutional investors.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think the Trump administration has come into office and very much reversed the Biden administration's course. No longer is the United States focused on, kind of the global climate agenda. It's now focused on American energy dominance. No longer is it focused on intermittent resources. It's now focused on baseload resources. The motivating principle is no longer reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it's winning the race on artificial intelligence. This administration is very clearly focused on sort of those priorities. In pursuit of that, it has done a lot to reverse what the Biden administration had enacted. It's also sort of reframed the priorities of the United States and the tools of the federal government, and it's attempting to also influence the tools of state and local governments in terms of correcting course, towards more baseload power. Now, of course, baseload power often means fossil fuels. It also means nuclear. It also means geothermal, all of which are priorities of this administration. It does not mean solar. It does not mean wind. And that's clearly where the disconnect is for many in this room and for many across the country. The Trump administration has clearly looked askew at intermittent resources, in particular wind, in particular offshore wind, that is a massive issue for the energy community, for states like New Jersey, and I would just also say for project certainty across the board, and I think that's something we'll talk about going forward.
Yeah, you had mentioned the politicization of energy issues right now, and I think here in New Jersey, for those of you who are not from New Jersey, we have a gubernatorial race next week, and energy issues are front and center. I've been in the energy and utilities business my entire career, and I've never seen this much attention on what is going on with energy prices, where generation is coming from. And it's clear in this gubernatorial election that we may have a real shift, potentially a catapult, from one direction to another, depending on the outcome. And I know we'll hear from some of those candidates tomorrow. You also touched on, we touched on permitting, and essentially, how do we actually get things done, get things through all of these different agencies? I think that whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, there is going to be there's going to be whether you have a Democrat or a Republican in the White House or in the governor's office, there's frustration with permitting timelines. Where do you think, or do you think, there is any likelihood of bipartisan or durable reform, whether under NEPA, FERC siting authority, transmission permitting, any of the many federal agencies that need to examine new projects, and what should the industry be watching for?
So I think there was a lot of ambition going into this year, thinking that with a three-ways control Republican White House, DC, that there could be some permitting reform, but at this point, we are not holding our breath. Today being the 28th, we're now 4 weeks into a government shutdown, and there's not a lot of momentum in that area. And so it's helpful to remember that even in DC, consensus may not necessarily be a driver for achievement. So then, how can conflict, be accomplished, be a driver for getting something done? But one of the things I do want to emphasize is that the Supreme Court's decision this summer in 7 County had somewhat of a paradoxical outcome, because on the one hand, it may have done a whole lot to constrain the ability for project opponents to challenge cases based on NEPA. So that is a great, a de facto great permitting reform. But on the other hand, because it does that, it might have deflated some of the momentum in Capitol Hill to get something done, right? That the court may have achieved something that the legislature no longer needs to do, and that just may have slowed the progress on permitting reform. I think you're going to hear a lot of headlines about it. I saw 2 today, but headlines do not equal accomplishments.
And I agree 100% that 7 counties is a seminal case. The Supreme Court, in an 8-0 decision, stated that we needed a, quote, course correction on the National Environmental Policy Act and its implementation. The court stated that federal agencies are not permitted to use NEPA to stop projects. It is a procedural statute that only provides them with guidelines for how to review environmental impacts. It is not a substantive statute that should be used to stop projects. That was an 8-0 decision, which was really remarkable. Now, the courts have also been active beyond 7 counties. Even before that, the courts ruled that 40 years of Council on Environmental Quality, National Environmental Policy Act implementing guidance was invalid. The Trump administration came into office and acted on that case law to actually rescind that 40 years of CEQ guidance. And so the courts have been as concerned, across the board, as the Congress and as stakeholders have been. They've acted, and those cases are going to have far-reaching ramifications for sort of constraining the permitting issues. Simultaneously, the Trump administration has very aggressively come into office and begun its own sort of permitting reform efforts. It's reviewing rules and regulations across the board and repealing them, rescinding them, modifying them as it sees fit. It's having its individual agencies rework their own NEPA implementing guidance. Department of Energy, for example, has made some pretty big changes to its NEPA implementing guidance, constraining the scope of what it will review going forward. In fact, hammering home the point that its implementing guidance is just guidance. It is not a substantive rule or regulation that can be litigated against. A lot of stuff in all of these areas is being active. Congress is also looking at permitting reform, agreed that in this environment, if we can't fund the government, how can we get to permitting reform? I will say that we hear a lot of talk from leadership in Congress that they are very optimistic that they actually could achieve something on bipartisan permitting reform in the near term. We have a lot of clients that are investing in that issue because they're hearing the same thing. So it will definitely be a topic of discussion that everyone will be reading about. You may need to participate in if you have an interest in it. But, all of that being said, hard to believe it's actually possible.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that would change our outlook is if there was a catalyst. And unfortunately, a catalyst that would probably be the most, provide the most reason would be, unfortunately, be like a grid disruption or some sort of duration of energy scarcity.
Can I offer one more catalyst that may already be on the table, which is project certainty? The cancellation of offshore wind leases, has had such an impact on any energy project developer's outlook, and in particular their investors. Whether domestic or foreign, a lot of foreign investors want to come into the U.S. through these trade agreements that President Trump has sort of promulgated with them. The number one question, the number one concern is, how do I know 3 years, 4 years from now, my project will be safe? Whether it's an oil and gas project, a solar project, a wind project, any other kind of project, any multi-year large energy infrastructure investment has a question mark over it because of that uncertainty that's been created. It's possible that issue alone, if addressed in permitting reform effectively, could appeal to both sides of the aisle and stakeholders across the energy spectrum to attract permitting reform where previously it didn't seem possible. Certainly it has changed the dynamics of that debate.
Yeah, as someone who worked on offshore wind, both in the Murphy administration and also represented clients in the private sector, it's been a tough turnaround for that industry. I think the state kind of went all in terms of looking at this as an opportunity not only for more energy, but jobs, economic development, obviously. And the issue of certainty is really a big one. And I think that's what's so tough, just kind of going back to the politicization of these issues, is that, how can companies make these very, very large investments or plans to make these large investments in projects that, sometimes take far, more than a decade. And, we're seeing it right now at the Gateway Tunnel, for example. The president apparently is trying to cancel that project as well. And when you have that disruption, it does make it tough to attract investment and kind of move forward. And so that's a good segue into talking about federal and state tension. New Jersey, obviously, for the past 8 years has been pursuing a very ambitious clean energy and climate policy. How do you see the balance of power playing out between federal preemption and state leadership? Obviously, I mentioned offshore wind, but also around grid interconnection and distributed resources. If we're going to have success in bringing on, significant more generation, or really build far more transmission and enhance our capabilities there, we're going to need government to work together at the state and the federal level.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a counteraction at the subnational level. We called it the rollback rebound during Trump 1.0, how his deregulatory agenda encouraged decarbonization efforts at the state level, right? Then we called it the Biden backlash, where states with a lot of conventional resources sought to support those incumbent legacy industries or try to limit the entry of alternatives. And so we thought going into Trump 2.0, we could see another rollback rebound, but we haven't really, at least not one that reflected what we saw before. And I think the primary reason for that is that states are focused on rising power prices and rising demand. It's important to remember that when a lot of states set these decarbonization targets, they did it when demand was largely flat, right? Where low natural gas prices made power prices more affordable. It's a lot easier to green up the grid when you're not growing. Well, we're growing now. How are you gonna, how can you take out natural gas and coal and some of these other resources when you're facing rising power demand? So we've seen that much more muted of this federal-state tension, at least in the power sector. Certainly in other areas, it's more pronounced. But I think that's likely to continue. This year, we saw a lot of state legislatures focus on prices, and we expect the same next year because we don't expect power prices to get better next year.
Yeah, and I agree. I think rising power prices is going to put a lot of pressure on states, also on the federal government, in terms of policy choices going forward. I would note that President Trump issued an executive order targeting, quote, I think it was state overreach, in terms of rules, regulations, policies, guidance, consent decrees, any mechanism where the state is intersecting with the federal government, or under separate from the federal government, to place what the Trump administration's executive order termed as an undue burden on energy. And specifically, the executive order expressed concerns about things like climate policies, the low carbon fuel standard or the clean electricity standard, renewable portfolio standards. These types of mechanisms are squarely sort of within this executive order that President Trump issued, and he's directed his Attorney General to account for all of these mechanisms and to make recommendations to the administration on what, if anything, the administration should do about them. So clearly, the Trump administration has an interest in influencing state policies, not dictating to them, because I don't think they found a way to do that yet. But certainly to sort of highlight them and then to try to make states accountable for them. And so my guess is you will see more on that front as that executive order is implemented going forward. You've already seen President Trump, take specific actions. The California waiver, actually Congress repealed with the Congressional Review Act and the president signed into law. The president would like to, I believe reportedly, build the Constitution Pipeline and the Northeast Energy Supply Pipeline through New York State. There's a lot of reporting that perhaps Governor Hochul, got the Empire Wind project back online in return
Waits for pipes, yeah.
Yeah, in return for sort of going along with the president's vision on that under the national energy emergency he's declared. But a lot of certainly creative thinking coming out of the administration, and I don't think it stops at the federal government. We're already seeing where it's also impacting states, and my guess is there will be more to come on that front.
Yeah, I just want to add. Are we on? There we go. I just want to add, since, obviously nowhere is the federal-state tension more pronounced, at least in the power sector, than with offshore wind. I just want to add that, for offshore wind proponents, there's a hope that there will be a Biden-like administration after the Trump administration, and that's possible, and that would be a net positive. But I think project developers, and especially the financiers behind those projects, are going to be wary of investing in a capital-intensive industry with such demonstrable high election risk. Because can you really get a project through permitting and fully built in 4 years? Might not be able to do it.
We've talked a lot about volatility and uncertainty, but obviously this also brings opportunity. The stock market is hitting fresh highs. There's a lot of investment, still being made. Energy is critical to the future of AI, which seems to have everyone's attention right now. What signals are you all seeing from capital markets, utilities, and corporate buyers in response to the administration's early moves? Are we entering into a wait-and-see period or a more decisive pivot?
I'm going to leave you guys with a new term that we've coined at ClearView. It's called InFOMO. It's the fear of missing information. Because the president and his secretaries and everything, they will promulgate rules from non-traditional sources. We have found really important information about an energy proposal being announced during a press conference that was about a topic that was convened to discuss something that had nothing to do with energy. And so we're constantly we're trying to figure out what's going on, and it's affecting us, it's affecting our clients. Some of our clients have said that this is among the most difficult times to invest, notwithstanding the obvious business opportunity of rising power demand. And there are a number of reasons for that. As mentioned, a new president may feel very differently, and presidents are gaining power with each administration. And once a president, they tend to learn from their predecessors, right? So once a president gets that power, they might not be likely to try to get rid of it. They may want to use it for their own purposes. And so I would also emphasize that Trump himself has proven to be mercurial, right? During the campaign trail, he often rallied against electric vehicles. And then on the 50th day of his second term, he bought an electric vehicle on the White House lawn, right? That's a pretty big shift. So our clients are just saying that there's just so much risk out here, and this is particularly challenging in the power sector because, these are, as I said earlier, they're capital-intensive investments that are meant to have long asset lives. They're meant to be built for 40, 50, 60 years. And so you don't want to make that investment with this much uncertainty.
Yep. And, sort of based on my experience with our clients over the past 9 months now, I guess, and with investors and with foreign governments and with foreign investors, because I've been talking to all of these groups consistently over the last 9 months and working with them. There's a clear feeling that by and large, the opportunities are kind of maximal today for a lot of energy infrastructure that had been out of favor. And the administration is being very creative in terms of how it views, its authorities and how it clears the path for these projects. And so, many parties are coming to the table and saying, I can do something today that I never would even thought was possible, a year ago, 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. And now's the time to act. Foreign investors and foreign countries have an additional incentive, which is, trade and tariffs, and those agreements and implementing them, and sort of, capturing value out of those in return for those countries having reduced tariffs. And so, there's an additional incentive for them to sort of enter our marketplace and to act. At the end of the day, the fundamental question that is being asked is, if I, take this risk, if I invest in this project, is another administration going to come in and reverse it 4 years from now? That has put people, I think, from sort of, out of the gates going towards projects to sort of dialing back, taking a step back, and maybe being a little more sober-minded about what the risks might be, to, I think, now that some trade agreements are coming together, now that you see some offtake agreements with regard to different energy projects being announced by major off-takers and major countries and companies, that appears, the confidence appears to be coming back for that investment. But then again, a lot of those offtake agreements aren't final agreements. They're just kind of agreements to agree in the future. And I should also note that when I talk about creativity, I mean, we all know now that the Trump administration is interested in taking equity, in certain projects. In the critical minerals space, the Trump administration has shown a willingness to actually create price floors for critical minerals, and using the traditional tools as well, like loans and loan guarantees and things of that nature. But from a sort of financing perspective, this administration is doing a lot more than previous administrations have done, and with that raises a lot of questions. Some clients are happy to have equity from the federal government. Other clients say, I have no interest in that. I do not want the federal government in my books, in my business, dictating to me what decisions I'm making going forward. And so, these are all sort of, it's a mixed bag at the end of the day. There are opportunities. There are also lots of questions. There, is also a lot of uncertainty, all wrapped into like one analysis that a company has to make.
Yeah, so I have a lot to say about this, so I'm definitely going to need my notes for it. But we've actually identified a trend that's exemplified by the Westinghouse news that I'm sure you've all seen. It's that for years we've watched Western market-based democracies converge towards policies that typify more of an authoritarian government, right? Where it's much more muscular, it's much more dictatorial, and it's important to distinguish a trend, a shift here, is because during the Biden administration they passed the IIJA, the IRA, the CHIPS Act, and let's be clear. I mean, these were unblushing tripartite of trillion-dollar industrial policy laws, right? These were very significant. That said, a lot of those provisions were trying to incentivize something through tax credits and through grants and loans and loan guarantees. It is different when government owns a piece of that property. It's a piece of a company. It's somewhat like a government declaring a champion. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that is a distinction. That is a distinction that is worth noting. because we said a couple months ago that, amid rising power demand, all the examples we saw this summer of, let me look at my notes here, them investing in Intel, MP Materials, Lithium Americas, Trilogy Metals, US Steel, right? We said power sector may be next. Insert today's news, right? And so it looks to us like the government, the Trump administration, setting up Westinghouse to be a champion of national nuclear power. And again, we're not speaking about that's good or bad, but I would say that could have some unintended consequences, and perhaps most notably, it could crowd out competition. How are you going to compete with the federal government? And the last point I'll make about this is we often talked about how new nuclear power and data centers, there was a partnership there that made sense because technology companies have the financial wherewithal and the risk tolerance to take on new nuclear power. We said, they have the money to do it. We know who else has much more money than the technology company? The federal government.
That's true. All right. Before we see if the audience here has any questions for us, just wanted to see if we could offer one brief takeaway in terms of, what single development will you be watching closely over the next 12 months? I know for me, one of the things that I am really interested in is seeing where AI is in another year, because the way that AI is being deployed really is having an impact on nearly every facet of our economy and our innovation that's going on right now. So I'm really curious to see where that is in a year. How about you guys?
What I just said was my original answer to that question, but since I already did my little speech there, I'll say the other big topic we'll be looking for is obviously rising power prices and specifically what the states do to try to address that. Because by our projections, by other people's projections, power prices are at best going to stay relatively level in most states, but are likely to increase in many. And so it's already very difficult on a number of constituents, and it doesn't look like to be easing soon. So the states are going to need to get involved, and that's a very tough question that doesn't have easy solutions.
I agree. I think rising power prices is something we should all be watching. It will be very interesting to see how that question plays out, politically and from a policy perspective in Washington. Do people stay the course? Do people modify and adjust in response to rising power prices? There's nothing like rising power prices that can terrify a member of Congress more. And the gas tax has not been increased for I don't know how long now, simply because of that point. The same can be applied to retail electricity prices and certainly for businesses as well. Another question I just am sort of curious about is in one of the Trump executive orders, there was a directive that the Department of Energy stand up 3 nuclear power reactors by July 4th, 2026. And I think the threshold would be that they reach criticality, kind of in a demonstration environment. I've been led to believe that actually could happen, and it could be more than 3. I'm curious to see if that happens. That would be a massive accomplishment, a massive breakthrough, and may very well shake loose sort of small modular reactor technology and advanced reactor technology going forward.